hierarchy is built into the fabric of the world, of the universe. A hierarchical structure, which is opposed to egalitarianism. Our very world, in its natural law, is hierarchical. Once we grasp the transcendental truth, the transcendence of goodness and the transcendence of beauty, we realize we cannot grab these things for ourselves, but we have to fall into them. We have to accept them. Now I'm going to go back to that original question that we asked a while back of, is something good because God wills it, or is something good because it is good in and of itself? We're going to see this is a big intellectual dilemma here. This comes from Plato's dialogue with Euthyphro. In Plato's dialogue with Euthyphro, he asks the question, is something pious and good and true and beautiful because God wills it to be good, or is it good because it is good? So there's two premises here. Is something good because it is good? Or is something good because God makes it good? What's the answer? What makes something good? Is it good because God wants it to be good? Or is it good because it is good? You think it's good because it is good? You think it's both? Well, I think the answer is more here than here. But let's look at it. Okay, if something is good because it is good, what do you think is the problem with saying that? Okay, God chooses it because it is good. What's the problem with that?
God doesn't choose it. God wills it, but He cannot make something that's not good. So it's like a combination of the two.
Okay, you're getting to the point or to how we're going to get to the answer, but right now we have to deal with, okay, we're saying in this one it's good because God chooses it to be, or because it is good. Well, what are we saying? What is God? Is there anything higher than God? Well, then if it's good because it is good, then wouldn't that mean that God has to assent to it? In which case, God would no longer be the summum bonum, the highest thing, the highest good. You see the problem here? If something is pious, good, true, and beautiful, because it is pious, true, good, and beautiful, then does that mean that God has to assent to it? And if God has to assent to it, is He all-powerful then? Doesn't that seem to say that there's something higher than God? Does that make sense? See what I'm saying there? This is the intellectual quandary. And if something is good because God chooses it to be good, what's the problem there? This one's more readily apparent.
God chooses something that's above Himself.
Well, if God chooses something to be good and that makes it good, what does that mean?
That God could choose something to be evil, or He can't.
Okay, so that means that God could choose, okay, murder's bad, but God could arbitrarily decide that murder is good. So this can't be right because then God could arbitrarily change, right? So there's an arbitrary nature to this. It's good because God chooses it to be good. Well, then He could choose murder to be good, or He could choose hunger to be good, or whatever. But if it is good because it is good, it seems to say that God would have to assent to it. So what I'm saying here, does that make sense? It would almost be like there's something higher than God then. Because it seems to say that this good is outside of God. It's good because it is good, then it's outside of Him, right? Isn't this what it kind of necessarily says here? You guys take issue with me? God? In your Pebble watch? What does your Pebble watch say? Ask it.
My what?
Isn't that a Pebble watch?
No.
what you guys think. How are we going to get out of this? Is something good because it is good?
No, it's good because it comes from God.
You're more right there. But how? This is everything we've been talking about in regards to who God is.
Being is goodness.
Yes. God exists differently. So when you talk about, if you were to converse with an atheist on this, these are seemingly two contradictory things. If something is good because it is good, then that means God has to ascend to it, therefore He is not the highest being. Two, if God chooses to be good, then it's arbitrary. But this has to do with what we're saying, that truth, beauty, and goodness. I can't reproduce that sound. Truth, beauty, oh yeah. See, I can't do it. Okay, truth, beauty, and goodness. Participate. She's powerful.
Let's start throwing stuff at it.
What have we been saying about God? Really? Hold on.
He is being itself.
He's goodness itself.
Okay, He's being Himself, He's goodness Himself. So how do you think that gets us out of this?
You got to create everything.
But did He create what's good?
Yes, yeah. Well, no, He is goodness.
There. That's right. What we are talking about here is utterly different than every concept of what most people think about. On a surface level, it seems like, oh, it's okay to say that it's good because it is good. Well, you can't say that because that means that God would have to assent to it. And therefore, He wouldn't be the highest being. But the fact that God is the ground of all being, from all eternity, He is goodness, He is truth, He is beauty. He is these things in His essence, and therefore these things are eternal because God is eternal.
So basically, you could like swap good out for God on the first one, right? You see what I'm saying? Since it's not
Good is good because it is God?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just replace the words. And
Right.
It doesn't change.
But that's not how you normally hear it. Now, most people haven't read the dialogue with Plato and Euthyphro. But when you start looking at that, it does seem to say that if the goodness exists outside of God, then He has to assent to it. But goodness doesn't exist outside of God because He is, in His essence, and is in His existence, He is goodness, and He is truth, and He is beauty. And so do you see how significant that is by saying that when we say God is love, we hear it so much it becomes trite to us. But that is His very existence and essence. Okay, so what is good and true and beautiful is eternal because it is His nature and it is His essence from all eternity. Now, we desire something that is beyond this world. We desire these things which are eternal. The fact that we desire them we have desire at all, okay, means that what we are desiring, we've come to the conclusion, must be transcendental because we can't land on it in this world. How does this differ, for example, from Buddhism? What is nirvana? If you look at what nirvana is.
Isn't it kind of like an escape from reality?
When you start to look at it, it almost seems like, okay, St. Thomas Aquinas, I don't think we've read this. You can correct me, I don't recall it being in this particular book, but what is the highest thing that we can do as a human being? What's the highest good that we can accomplish in this life? For St. Thomas. And I don't expect you to know this because... Was it in the book? I can't remember. Oh, it was in the book. Okay. I've read so many things on St. Thomas, I can't remember if it was in this one or not. Yeah, so the highest good here is contemplation. Okay? So when you start looking at nirvana, it almost seems pretty close, but it's very different. What is the state of nirvana?
Isn't like perfect satisfaction and happiness?
Perfect peace. Kind of like meditation.
It's almost like disappearing. It's the elimination of desire. What's the problem with that, though? Okay, it's good, but how does it conflict, though?
Your desire to lose that desire.
You're desiring to eliminate desire. And you can't escape desire because you desire to eliminate desire. And this is a very big distinction between Christianity and Buddhism because the fact that when we get to heaven, will desire be eliminated? No. Because God is inexhaustible. There's nothing we could ever know. There's nothing, we will never know all there is to know about God for all eternity. He's inexhaustible. So there is no elimination of desire. But there seems to be a conflict because the desire to eliminate desire itself is a contradiction. Now, in Christianity, the reason they can be closely confused is because we free ourselves from certain desires to pursue the ultimate desire. Or we detach ourselves from certain attachments in order to attach ourselves to the true good. See these paradoxes. We detach ourselves from something so as to attach ourselves to what really matters. We eliminate certain desires or try to bring them under control, put reins on them, in order to desire what is truly desirable. So, in some sense, you see on the surface level, Buddhism, Hinduism, and Christianity seem to have certain, you can confuse contemplation with nirvana, but you can't, because they're two very different things. Nirvana is almost like a complete disappearing. At the end, the Buddhists don't believe there is a God, in contrast to Hinduism. There is no God. And so, nirvana is the state of discovery of nothingness in a certain way. It's not nihilism. It's different. But a nirvana is a state of almost just, it's not contentment because the discovery of almost like nothingness. It's confusing. But for Aristotle, remember Thomas is using Aristotle here, right? Okay, so Aristotle articulates things about happiness too. Okay? He believed that you can achieve perfect happiness in this life. Aristotle believed that happiness is attainable in this life, perfect happiness. He agreed that, now remember, Aristotle is before Christ. So he said that happiness is the ultimate purpose and end of human existence. Exactly what Ali said at the beginning. That is the final cause of human life, to be happy. Therefore, he concluded that happiness does not consist in pleasures, nor is it just one virtue. Aristotle said that happiness is the exercise of virtue. And he said that happiness cannot be achieved until the end of one's life. And so he indicates there that it's not a temporary state. Okay? Aristotle is one of the first ones to ever say that happiness is the cause of human life, or is the end of human existence, the meaning and purpose of human life. But he also said that happiness is not a temporary state. It's almost like laying the foundations of the gospel. Even though he wasn't Jewish and he wasn't Christian, it's before Christ, it was a pagan world, but look at how there's truth, beauty, and goodness in that. He said that happiness is not a temporary state, because you can't tell if you're happy until you've reached the end of one's life. Which seems to indicate that, okay, happiness doesn't lie in hedonism or pleasure. It's not a temporary thing. It has to be something constant. Happiness is the perfection of human nature. Aristotle said that happiness is the perfection of human nature. And since man is a rational animal, meaning that he can think, human happiness depends upon the exercise of reason. And Aristotle said that happiness depends on acquiring a moral character. Those cardinal virtues of justice, temperance, fortitude, and prudence. And he said that happiness requires intellectual contemplation, because that is the exercise of our intellect. Do you see all the pre-Christian themes there? The contemplation, okay? Because we have to exercise our reason. So St. Thomas takes Aristotle, baptizes him, and says that there are two kinds of happiness. These can be broken down into certain parts. Does St. Thomas say that we can be perfectly happy in this life alone? Can we be perfectly happy here in this world? Okay, no, he does not. Perfect happiness is what he calls beatitudo. Okay? Happiness, 1. Beatitudo. What does this remind you of? The Beatitudes. 8 Beatitudes, right? Okay, so beatitudo in Latin. And also, we get the word blessed, okay, from this. Beatitudo. This, St. Thomas says, is not possible in this life. Go back to what we said earlier. C.S. Lewis says we desire what is not of this world, because what of this world cannot bring about this beatitudo. Therefore, we are made for another world. That's syllogism. So, St. Thomas says the beatitudo lies in the entrance into and participation in the eternal transcendentals of truth, beauty, and goodness. That once we participate in the eternal, I don't know why it's doing that. Notice the word participation. We participate. We take part in the eternal nature of God. That is after this life. But there can be, he says, an imperfect happiness in this world. And it's attainable in this life, and it's in proportion to our exercise of our reason through contemplation, and he calls this felicitas, or felicity. It's a different level of happiness. This would be in the saintly people we would say, like Mother Teresa experienced a felicitas. Okay? In Ecclesiastes, felicitas, not felicitas, it's a classical one. Felicitas. A felicity. Coming about through an exercise of virtue. See all the Aristotelian themes here. Okay. Virtue, for St. Thomas, is part of what it means to get to felicity. Now, there is an important distinction between enjoyment and happiness. Okay? When you go and ask, and I don't mean this, please do not take this in the wrong way, but if you go out and survey campus right now, what is happiness? What are some of the answers you're probably going to get?
Having no tests or homework.
Yeah, various levels of enjoyment, right? Various levels of enjoyment. I enjoy having no tests. I enjoy having no homework. I enjoy being with my friends. I enjoy drinking. I enjoy eating, or whatever. This is the pursuit of worldly desires, and this is enjoyment. And there is nothing wrong with enjoyment. In fact, St. Thomas Aquinas says that the remedy to a bad day, he said, was a glass of red wine and a hot bath. That's what so there's nothing wrong with enjoyment. In fact, he thought that we should drink until we reach a state of merriment, not drunkenness, but merriment. That, the use of alcohol is not sinful. There's nothing wrong with enjoying things. But there is a distinction between enjoyment and happiness. They are two very different things. One who does not have enjoyment, does that mean that they cannot be happy? And this goes back to the original question on the board at the beginning of class. Is it possible to suffer and be happy? As we make Flannery O'Connor and St. Thomas start to converge now, is it possible to suffer and be happy? Jesus Christ, right? Okay. Jesus Christ. Ultimate suffering there. And many of the ancient fathers of the church said that Christ was not the first person to be crucified here. Well, we said that he experienced the worst pain. Why? That the crucifixion would have been almost infinitely more painful for him than anyone else.
Because of the weight of all the sins being the entire world on his shoulders.
Okay. Yes, but why? Did he have the weight of all human sin? Because of who he was. We say he was perfect man. He did not know the stain of sin. And because he did not know the stain of sin, he would not know the feeling of pain. And so it was infinitely more painful for him because he was perfect. When we are hurt, we've experienced many pains as a result of our own sin. Our sin brings about pain. We bring, in fact, part of the remedy of sin is experiencing the pain that it brings. Like, when I lie to my best friend, what happens? I may lose my best friend, or my best friend will no longer trust me. That is a terrible pain. If you lie to your friend, your best friend, you lie to them, they lose their trust in you, is that a pain? Yeah, you're going to feel pain from that. But Christ didn't know that kind of pain because he didn't have sin on his soul. And therefore, it is said traditionally that he would have experienced his pain would have been almost infinitely intensified because of his perfection. So, the idea that we can be happy and suffer, yes, we can. Because happiness does not lie in anything in this world. Happiness lies in the attainment and participation in those eternal transcendentals. And we've already shown how, logically, that has to be the case because of what we desire and how we desire it and how it's never satisfied. Therefore, our happiness does not lie in anything here, but in our participation in the eternal truth, beauty, and goodness. Again, the theme of the course, nascantur in admiratione, being born in admiration, being born in the awareness of truth and beauty and goodness. These are the things that bring about that perfect attainment. So it's interesting that happiness cannot be attained here, that kind of happiness, but not for Gnostic reasons. What does the Gnostic say? Happiness cannot be attained here because... What is Gnosticism? Arnold.
There's nothing beyond earthly pleasure or anything.
No.
There's nothing, period.
No. That's nihilism.
Isn't confined by our bodies entirely?
No, so that was
Is that what you're trying to say?
What?
Well, are you trying to say that the body is bad?
If it's right, yeah.
Don't be afraid to be wrong. That's what this class is about. Gnosticism is the body because of our bodies, we are withheld from attaining true happiness. So we want to be careful. We're not talking about a Gnostic kind of happiness here. That we have to eliminate suffering in order to be happy. Because happiness, while it cannot be found here at that beatitudinal level, doesn't mean it's because of our bodies. But because we cannot participate in the eternal truth, beauty, and goodness in the same way that we will in heaven. And that's why no worldly or material good, like, what are the four substitutes St. Thomas says that we often substitute for God. There are 4 things he says that we often substitute for God.
Power, pleasure, money.
Power, pleasure, wealth. There's one more.
Honor.
Honor, fame. Now, I recently, some of you may have heard me talk about it. I think I mentioned this either last class or it was in a homily. I get confused. I talk a lot. But there was, there was a Facebook thing that came out, 39 actors you didn't know who were dead. And I flipped through all 39 of them, and like 2 out of the 39 died from like accidental or natural causes. And 37 of them were all suicide or overdose, drugs, alcohol. So it would seem to indicate that happiness does not lie in this, nor does it lie in this, nor does it lie in this, nor does it lie in this. But are any of these evil intrinsically? Father Barron says no. Why? Because they are fundamentally good because they are. They exist. None of these are evil. Power is not evil. Pleasure is not evil. Wealth is not evil. Honor is not evil. But they are not God. And therefore our true happiness does not lie in them. A state of happiness now. Now let's define what happiness is. Okay, we know happiness is a participation in the eternal transcendentals. What does that mean? A state of happiness can exist only when the will no longer seeks anything. Not our intellect, but our will. Because we have found it in God. But that doesn't mean that we stop desiring, which is different from nirvana. Because we will always desire more. The more we get of God, the more we want of Him. Because we seek the divine essence, and the divine essence is truth, beauty, and goodness, and because the divine essence is eternal, we can never have enough of it. So what does man's happiness consist? This is what St. Thomas asks in the Treatise on Happiness, in the attainment of the divine essence. So, to make this clear, 2 points have to be observed. First, the fact that we desire perfect happiness means what? Here. That we are not perfectly happy. Here. We are not perfectly happy. Secondly, that the perfection of any power is determined by the object that we desire. In other words, in saying that the perfection of any power is determined by the nature of its object means that we cannot love what we do not know, the fact that we cannot desire what we do not know. We desire God. Therefore, the nature of the object, which is God, is infinite. Blow your mind, literally. Okay. So what are the points of continuity that in doing this reflection assignment, that I'm looking for from Thomas and from the movie The Giver and Flannery O'Connor, bringing all this together? Nihilism, this nothingness, neglects the human soul in favor of preoccupation with the world. This is what when Jesus speaks of the world, He means the spirit of the world. Not that the world is bad, but that the spirit of the world leads us to these 4 things. Why did St. Thomas come up with these 4 things? Do you think? What the devil tempt Jesus with prior to his public ministry? Every single one of those things. All the kingdoms. So you have wealth and honor. Eat this bread. Satisfy your desire, pleasure. The exercise of power. These are the four things that we commonly substitute with the preoccupation of this world. This is everything that Nietzsche says that we want, right? You're all four of these things. This is nihilism. Get these four things at all costs. That's what nihilism is. There is no concept in the movie The Giver or in nihilism that suffering can become the face of the good. There is no value in suffering whatsoever. Therefore, it must be eliminated because you cannot create perfect happiness with it. We see in O'Connor, somebody said this earlier, every time God intervenes, it's right when the intervening needs to happen. The face of evil. Right in the face of evil, God intervenes and awakens in these people a desire for happiness. So this society in the movie The Giver has reached this climax of it's no longer working. Okay? And it comes about through Jonas. And he sees this evil. And in the midst of that, Jonas's consciousness is awakened. Good is not fully comprehended until we have seen what is evil. Remember when they're getting ready to euthanize, oh my gosh. What? The girl, and they're all sitting in the box. What's her name in the movie? Do you remember? Huh? Fiona. It is Fiona, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, what does Meryl Streep turn to Jeff Bridges and say? You've seen what the world was like before, right? You've seen what the world was like before. You want to go back to that? And there's no trust in the human person, right? There's no goodness. She thought all those things create what's evil. And so they're getting ready, the irony is, they're getting ready to kill this girl to preserve this idea of not killing. Okay, so the good is not fully comprehended until we see what is evil. Goodness becomes more apparent in the reality of evil. Just as one color, St. Thomas says, cannot be fully defined until you see it against other colors. If everything is one color, it's hard to make a distinction when you see another color. For example, all colors are precisely seen because there is a differentiation among them. So the fact that goodness is seen in the backdrop of evil. Now, nihilism that we're talking about of Nietzsche builds on the Enlightenment hope that humanity can save itself. That's what this movie is, The Giver. That we can save ourselves. It's a project of human means. Okay, the Enlightenment hope. The 17th century French Enlightenment, what did they say? The reason will accomplish everything, right? With the use of reason, we will overcome everything. But nihilism takes that a step further and says that the human race will only advance itself when it eliminates every concept of good and evil, sweeps away every sentiment. So it takes the Enlightenment principles that the human race can do it all on its own, and totally exponentially multiplies it and says that we have to eliminate our concepts of good and evil to create this advanced human race. What is the difference, do you think, between atheism and nihilism? Because there is a difference. When I talk about atheism, I mean like the atheism of Voltaire and Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, not the kind of evangelical atheism that we experience today. Okay, it's kind of, ironically, it's an evangelical atheism. Very much like nihilism. What's the difference? Atheism is the disbelief in God, right? What does nihilism do? It takes it a step further. What does it do?
Disbelief in life's purpose itself.
It's a destruction of God, right? Nihilism, it's not content with not believing in God. It has to destroy it. What is Zarathustra, the great protagonist in the famous line in Nietzsche's work? God is dead, and we have murdered him. God has to be destroyed. The destruction of God in order to create. The idea that nihilism, for Nietzsche, in order to create, you must destroy. That's the big difference between atheism and nihilism. In order to create, you must destroy. Hitler and the Nazis were the great Nietzscheans, the great Overmans. What did they do? They destroyed in order to create. For Nietzsche, if you want to create, then you have to annihilate. You have to destroy. You have to overturn all of the moral values and create something new. Does that make sense? There's a big difference between nihilism and atheism. I'm going to stop here for a moment and ask, do you guys have any questions over this so far? Anything I can make more clear or less clear for you? It can be about anything in regards to this. Does anyone have any questions at all? Pollard, do you have any questions? Make one up. Peter?
You were talking about the types of happiness, but you only went over one, and that was fleeing. What are the other three? It was like 2 4 that races away.
I said 3.
Well, you wrote a bunch of different notches.
I was talking about Aristotle's that we can attain happiness in this life, right?
No, before that. The very beginning. And on the board, right in the center of the board, 4 types of happiness. You wrote one, and then.
No, I'll have to think about that. Different levels of happiness.
Oh, yeah.
Eating, hedonism.
Yeah.
And stop there. And you stop there.
Let's see. In my notes.
Before sensation.
Oh, how easily I do forget. I think I know what you're talking about. Oh yeah, Spitzer's 4 levels of happiness, I think is what I think I was getting ready to refer to. And I must have, so I just stopped